square, which came into orb in April of this year and is very strongly present through November of 2013. And that square coincides with economic depressions, recessions, but it also tends to correspond with an increase when Pluto contacts Uranus, whether it's a conjunction, a square, or an opposition. It tends to symbolize increased earthquake activity. And
you know what, Linda? We never knew that that's what the shift meant, did we?
Yeah, literally. We think of the shift as but consciousness shifts tend to correspond with economic crises and shifts, and also natural crises and shifts. They all are a part of one universe. They're not necessarily separated from one another.
Yeah, they just evidence themselves a little differently because of the size of the beings, right?
I think so. But these earthquake conditions, I mean, Mexico City had a volcano that erupted just outside of Mexico City, and they evacuated most of the city in April. And then I think it was on May 20th, the day of a solar eclipse that was square to Neptune, a small city in Italy was practically totally destroyed by an earthquake.
Wow.
And it goes on and on. There was a major earthquake off of the coast of Costa Rica not too long, I think back in August, early September.
Yes, I remember that.
Yes, and the problem is that many of these events have not been reported on our news media. This is just striking to me, that it's only when there's a giant earthquake and tsunami like the one in Japan or the one in Banda Aceh, in Indonesia in 2004, a really, really mega disaster before it gets on our media.
So it's very interesting. This is a very interesting time where we've got these, let's call them the shifts. We've got these either disasters or eruptions or recessions. They're all basically storms, aren't they? And they're in individuals. But aren't they in the systems? Are the systems actually breaking down, Linda, or are they just going to morph and, you know what I mean? What's happening with money? What's happening with media? What's happening with the banksters? Simple questions, right?
My take on this is that Pluto in Capricorn symbolizes the establishment. By that, I mean our great institutions, the government, the people in power in government, and the coalition of transnational capitalists, most who originate in the United States, and what I call banksters, that are controlling the giant monopoly corporations who escape taxation by offshoring their profits and escape having to pay a labor force a decent wage by offshoring the labor force to cheap labor abroad, and escape having to comply with environmental laws because they go to countries where there are no environmental laws. This includes, by the way, the oil companies, the gas companies as well, who are busy cannibalizing the whole planet, no matter what the environmental consequences are. The banks, as we know, have played out historically. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and many others have been in the what I constantly refer to as the derivatives market. And derivatives, I like to explain to many of our listeners, in the financial world, are not buying or investing in a stock or buying a bond or even directly buying a currency or gold. What they're buying is a bet. They put a bet. Let's say they think the housing market, take a concrete example, 2008. Goldman Sachs bought a put, which is a bet that the housing market would crash. After nearly a decade of being a part of and encouraging subprime mortgages, and putting those up and so-called financializing those mortgages, it's been for one bank to sell another bank a mortgage. In this instance, they put mortgages in people's hedge funds. In fact, Goldman Sachs had them in their customers' funds, these subprime mortgages, assigning to them an innate value, which, unless that person over the years pays it off, has no value.
Wow.
And they sold these, by the way, the people sold these mortgages to the following nations: Iceland, Greece, Spain, Italy, and Ireland, which, as we all know right now, have either practically gone bankrupt or on the verge of bankruptcy. They sold them in the term of what they call credit default swaps, which is another derivative thing, that they passed the risk from these mortgages onto these nation sovereign wealth funds. And
so wait a sec, you're saying they build up a shaky structure and then bet that it'll fall?
Yes. And then after all of this selling of these subprime mortgages to these nations, plus the putting them in their own customers' accounts, they bought a massive put or bet contract that the mortgage market would collapse. Now, in the derivatives world, if you make a bet like this, see, a put is a bet that something will fall or fail. A call is a bet that the value of whatever that is will go up. Now, with buying a put, you have to have in either a put or a call. You have to have what's called a counterparty, or somebody that bets the other way that's in on this contract with you. Mm-hmm. The counterparty was AIG, the biggest insurance company in the world. So when the mortgage crashed, the whole housing market crashed and the stock market crashed in '08, Goldman Sachs, I forget what the figure was, in the billions of dollars, 28 billion or something like that, that AIG owed Goldman Sachs. And so the federal government, with our taxpayer money, had to bail out AIG, who paid off Goldman Sachs. Wow. Now, this is the kind of what I call gaming of the system, manipulating of the system, and then gaming the system.
But there's no policing. What about policing it? Is there any system?
Unfortunately, at the end of the Clinton administration, 1999, the three financial magnates that Clinton had appointed, Robert Rubin, the Secretary of the Treasury, and his assistant Lawrence Summers, and then, of course, Alan Greenspan as head of the Federal Reserve, those three pushed to deregulate the financial world. Right. And they succeeded, and the Republicans were 100% behind this and drafted legislation for Congress to get rid of the Glass-Steagall Act that had been passed in the last Depression under Roosevelt, which separated the mortgage lending banking from the betting financial banking industries. So that if you were an investment kind of bank, you didn't get involved in giving people loans or mortgages. You were strictly in stocks or bonds or derivatives or whatever. So they dropped that dividing line, allowing everybody to get into this free-for-all. Secondly, they passed what they called the Commodities Modernization Act, which took restrictions that had been there for years on the derivatives market, which is buying bets. Commodities are very often traded this way, and it had a purpose. Derivatives were not something that should necessarily be bad or forbidden, because farmers, for instance, who had a big soybean crop, and farmers are always at risk at losing their entire crop with drought, as we had last summer, or floods, as we're having now. So what farmers were allowed to do, and others were allowed to do, is buy puts on the soybean market, a bet that it would go down. So if they would make profits if their crop was good anyway, but if the crop failed, it was a hedge, which is the term hedge fund. It was a hedge against losing everything, because they would win on that put that they bought. So these instruments have had value. Don't misunderstand me. But when the regulators went wild and deregulated, I should say the government, what happened was everybody started getting into this derivatives thing where people could make billions and billions of dollars. To give you an example, in 2006, when Bush was president, at the end of the year, the International Bank of Settlement said that the derivatives market was around $360 trillion in notional value, notional until the contract expires or they exercised their option. 360 trillion.
Notional means it's all in your mind. Is that all?
Well, in a sense, yes. Until the contract, it's usually a timed contract.
Oh, okay.
Say you bet that the mortgage market is going to fail within 3 months or a year, or sometimes even 3 years, depending on how the contract is designed. And if you let it expire, it hasn't happened, then you lost. If you exercise your option when it did happen, you exercise your option, then you have won. But at any rate, my point is, in 2006, 6 years ago, that was, and it was mind-boggling, 360 trillion. Today, according to the Bank of International Settlements, that same derivatives market is $700 trillion.
Oh my gosh. This is after it's all crashed.
And these risks are mind-boggling. The risks that you take on this, for instance, this past year, MF Global, which was a financial entity / hedge fund organized by the former governor and former senator from New Jersey. And MF Global, that was Senator or Governor Corzine, who was formerly a co-chair of Goldman Sachs years ago.
Oh my.
He created this MF Global, and he bought a call on Europe, and it was a timed call, a bet that Europe would get better, in a sense. But he used his, which is supposedly against the law, he put all of his clients' money into this, and the government found out about it, so it crashed everything. All of their money was lost. All of the customers' accounts lost all of their money on this risky thing. And the reason, if we had waited long enough, when Europe made a decision to try, at least temporarily, to salvage the euro dollar and the European Union, he probably would have won. But that the government, that people intervened before that, so he lost all this, and he has gotten nothing but a slap on the wrist. J.P. Morgan Chase made a similar bet and lost over $4 billion on that transaction just this year. Now, one of the biggest scandals of all time is Barclays, this enormous bank / investment firm in England, was caught manipulating and gaming the LIBOR. Now, the LIBOR is the rate at which banks all over the world, the interest rate at which they lend money. So this is a very delicate thing because it affects global banking. And Barclays was caught manipulating it and then betting on it or gaming it. And they were right all the time because they were manipulating it. This is sort of like going to Las Vegas to the roulette, playing roulette, and at the same time having a little thing under the wheel to manipulate it to come out with your number.
But it was affecting the whole world, right?
Yes, it was. And there are likely to be maybe it's estimated 14 other giant banks who are doing the same thing. And if they were all caught and punished, the entire system would come down like an avalanche.
And then what would happen?
Barclays, well, these banks might fail, be closed. You'd have a banking system that would be impossible to insure with FDIC over here or any equivalent thing anywhere else. Now, what did they do? The CEO of Barclays resigned, and they fined them I think it was somewhere around $300 million, which is nothing to them. A little slap on the wrist, and they continue.
That's the thing, is there really is no policing, is there?
Not anymore.
Okay.
Not to. Now, Dodd-Frank was passed here in the U.S., which at least requires that derivatives trades and things be transparent and be done openly over markets, because there's what's called the dark market in derivatives, where people are sort of going online and making these transactions not over. They're not transparent, and they're not over exchanges. The problem is that it was such a weak law, it really hasn't affected that. That's still going on. But the point is that the government got out of regulation. Now, I want to say I'm a registered independent, but if you elect Mitt Romney and the Republicans get in, any rule of law or any regulatory agency will likely be scrapped. It will be an absolute free-for-all.
Because he said that. I heard him say that he was going to deregulate.
Right. Deregulate an already dangerously deregulated system. And the issue that we have here is also that the rich aren't paying much tax anyway. They find ways to offshore it. The capital gains tax under the Bush tax plan, which we still have to the end of this year, taxes capital gains at 15%. So somebody like Romney can make millions, which he did $22 million, and only pay 15% on it because it's all capital gains. We pay income tax on salaries or business profits, but because he's in that kind of a business where most of his fortune is in hedge funds, he only pays 15%, and it's really. Then a lot of the money that these guys make and these entities make is offshore, the Jersey Islands or the Cayman Islands or places like this that don't tax anybody. They have no income tax. So they create, remember Enron?
Yeah.
Remember that catastrophe? That was a derivatives company that wrote derivatives on energy. They started out as an energy company and wound up being a corporation that traded puts and calls on energy.
Well, hang on. I want you to tell us what's been happening astrologically that is pushing. It seems like it's pushing all this, isn't it? Like the Enron thing was a huge mess. The LIBOR, Barclay Bank, all of the banking and everything is a huge mess, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Well, different things happened at different times. We had, in 2000, we had the dot-com collapse. There was this huge investment in the 90s in these dot-com stocks, and we had that. And in 2001, we had 9/11. When Saturn went, we had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus in 2000, and then Saturn went into Gemini, which is traditionally a recessionary thing. And it was in those periods of time that the economy could have again been much worse. People went from dot-com stocks into real estate and started flipping houses and caused this wild, terrible bubble. But these people were finally caught doing this because Enron, for instance, offshored their books, and it was one whistleblowing accountant, a brilliant young woman who is now an author and a TV. I think she monitors a television show. I forget her name. She blew the whistle. She was an accountant at Enron on the accounting staff, and saw that all of their so-called profits, everything were bogus. Didn't make any sense.
And she knew how to reveal
blew the
that.
whistle.
Yeah.
Right. But these times that we're in now, as I said in my first book, What Next? I predicted this. My book was published in June of 2007. I predicted the collapse in the housing market, and by 2008 we'd have a stock market crash and be entering a Great Depression. Why is that? Because Pluto, or any slow-moving planet, when it reaches either at 27 to 29 Gemini or 27 to 29 Sagittarius, historically has corresponded with stock market crashes.
Oh, wow.
And as Pluto went into Capricorn, which is a very stiff down depressionary cycle, this happened at the end of 2008. It went from Pluto at late degree Sagittarius into Capricorn. Then, more recently, Pluto is now squared to Uranus in Aries, and the last time that happened was the 1930s. So I looked at these historic patterns from the past to see what happened before. And this is how I make my predictions in astrology. Now, you asked me earlier on about the system coming down and threats to the system. I feel that this is true. The last time Pluto was in Capricorn was there were previous time in the mid-1500s, the Protestant Reformation in Europe, when Martin Luther rebelled against the abuses and corruption in the Roman Catholic Church. And it took a long time, but it brought the Roman Catholic Church down as being on a political par with the monarchs. It was a big, big, big event in human history. The last time Pluto was in Capricorn was the beginning of the American Revolution. And the American Revolution started under the end of Pluto in Capricorn and went on when Pluto went into Aquarius, a sign that represents democracy. So I said that we are going to come up against a second American Revolution, but it's going to be a long, slow awakening as people in this nation who have been influenced by the media, who is also owned by giant transnational corporations, whose interest is to sway, either put people to sleep with horrendously bad programs.
Spin, and more spin, yes.
Yes, or to slant the news so that they're not getting news. And the only place you could get it is PBS and NPR, and then online. There's some great online newsletters, truthout.org, commondreams.org.
Move on.
There are a number of great. I recommend reading Matt Taibbi, a young man, a wonderful journalist who is an authority on the world of finance, an investigative reporter who's blown the whistle on Goldman Sachs, and he often writes for Rolling Stone magazine, which
and
is
his name
wonderful.
Is Matt Taibbi?
Matt Taibbi, I believe it's Taibbi.
Okay.
And then you have Bill Moyers, who is a great, great distinguished journalist who's back on PBS now and is also writing articles online. You have good people out there, but they're rare, and they're not in the mainstream media, which is corporate owned. And since Citizens United was voted on by the Supreme Court in 2010, it's taken all restraints and restrictions off of campaign financing. So billionaire corporations can throw as much money at any person's campaign that they want to get elected, so they don't have to pay any more taxes or have any more restraints at all.
So they're just buying the country, aren't they?
Yes, they. This is a terrible ruling, and this is why Romney is getting a lot more money than Obama is, because they believe that Romney will lean more in their favor than Obama. They're scared that when Obama gets into a second term, he no longer is beholden to them. And unfortunately, Goldman Sachs financed a lot of Obama's campaign in 2008 when they saw that he could actually win. I think President Obama, as I've said on other talk shows, was very, very naive and knew nothing of this. And he walks in and he gets hit with everything that the world could hit him with. I mean,
a broken
everything.
Machine.
But at any rate, in answer, I think our systems, our institutions will come tumbling down. But the cartel is going to fight tooth and nail these the one percenters. I think the Occupy Wall Street movement is very hopeful. It hasn't had one television camera on it since its initial beginning last year. last fall. It has had no. It's like they want Occupy Wall Street to disappear, and it's going all over the world. I mean, that Occupy movement and its demands of equal opportunity, and here there's a constitutional amendment to take all private money out of all political campaigns.
I love that.
And I love that notion. And eventually, but the Occupy movement is still going, and they're cohesive. They've got a lot of very intelligent, knowledgeable people, and they're occupying places all over the country, not doing anything illegal, but still getting arrested by the police, and no cameras are on them.
Interesting. So you're saying that whatever the configurations are that are astrological, that are amping up the deregulation and what you're calling the banksters and the cartel, and the power movement that's global, there's still energy for new rising systems, is what you're saying, right?
Yes, Veronica, but I feel that we're going to have a lot of consequences of so many years of selfishness, greed, deregulation, going to sleep, allowing the money to be taken away. It's the biggest, since the late 60s, early 70s, the biggest transfer of wealth in our history from the public at large into the pockets of the few has been going on. And it's been going on for such a long time, so gradually, that people are only now beginning to wake up to what has happened to them. And it's going to be a long slugfest. Uranus represents freedom, democracy, liberty, the power of the people. Pluto represents the establishment, especially in Capricorn, which will fight tooth and nail to hang on to its power. And you have those two forces against one another. And my feeling is that real progress in so many ways will begin to be made at the end of this depression cycle, which is December of 2020, under the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius.
That seems like a long time away.
Well, look how fast the decades have gone, in a blink of an eye. Just think about it. How fast has this year gone? I think we have to think, I know it's a time away, and I want to say to people out there, that my husband and I were committed to living in a sustainable community with progressive, great values that care about each other, that encourage local entrepreneurship, that believe in education, not just in math and science, but in civics, how to be a citizen, how to be a critical thinker, how to be a human being. And we are dedicated to that now, and there's a lot of people out there that have that level and even beyond of dedication. We have to, on a local level, where whatever we can do, however we can change things, we have to start it now, because nothing ever happens overnight. And when these planets change, all the groundwork that we do in our lives now will usher in the Aquarian age, which I am of the opinion begins truly at that point. Because Pluto will go into Aquarius in 2026.
So you're saying there's a revolution that's going to go on, but it's going to take 20 years or 10 years?
Yes. My feeling is eventually, because Pluto will return to the position at the beginning of this country, and in the position when we won the war, Pluto was in Aquarius and we became a nation. When Pluto last transited Aquarius in the 1700s, we had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution, plus the Age of Enlightenment. So we had an incredible science, technology started to really happen. That's very impressive. Pluto is going into Aquarius again in the 2020s. And I am calling this the democratic economy revolution, the energy revolution, and the green revolution.
But 2020. But what you're saying is that it's actually going on now, but it's just coming up into some kind of sustainability. Is that right?
Exactly. I feel that for a time we need to relocalize and commit ourselves to growing our food locally, organically, to managing and recycling our water, because we're going to have global water crises, either not enough of it or too much of it. We're so polluting with fracking, which is that horizontal drilling for gas using a toxic chemical. Fracking, digging for oil. I mean, Romney would have this nation dug up, and it just, the environment just so destroyed for a long, long, long period of time. I feel that we're going to get nuclear fusion. We already have hydrogen fusion, but what we have with hydrogen fusion is an awkward way of doing it in infrastructure, but it's actually been accomplished by the Livermore laboratories in California. They point 192 lasers at one pellet of hydrogen and release more energy than the world could possibly use with no pollution whatsoever.
Is it dangerous?
And a British company. This has already been done. It was done in 2011. And in my new book, which is called Fast Forward, I quote that article about that, the description of it. And a company in Great Britain is also joining forces with this, and they want to design a usable infrastructure. If we have that kind of fusion, everything is electricity. We don't have to ever use fossil fuel again. We just, all electric everything, all electric cars. We don't need fossil fuel.